Hi everyone, my name is Stephanie Joy Phillips. I'm the founder of World Childless Week and you're joining us today for a webinar called Working It Out. So welcome Berenice, Michael and Sarah. Thank you. Morning.
Good morning everyone.
Hi. Good afternoon, good evening. But thank you for turning up today to do this webinar. I'm literally going to turn my screen off and disappear and leave it to you, and I'll come back at the end when you actually finish just to have a little thank you and a recap on everything.
See you soon, Steph.
Thanks, Steph.
Good morning, everybody from all around the world. We've all gone a bit quiet now. You're not used to that. So we are the podcast. So this is the Full Stop podcast team. And Michael and I are both World Childless Week ambassadors. And Sarah is the very first People's World Childless Week champion. So yay! Woo!
I need sound effects. We could have had a cheer there. But anyway,
really don't.
Next year.
Next year, yeah, next year could be somebody else though. Anyway, you're a bit late.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Didn't think about that.
Yeah, think about it too. Hey, we are here today to talk about work and working it out, because work takes up, I don't know how many hours you all spend on work, but it's a lot, isn't it? We're sort of there all the time, and I think certainly in the last 2 years, if you've been wherever you are in the world and however your work situation has changed, and work's become sort of part of our homes as well, if you've been working from home, like many of us have been doing so, and that kind of idea of family as well. But what we've been seeing, I think, in the community has been an awful lot of kind of pushback now, and people getting really involved in gender equality and all that kind of conversation about kind of making fertility policies, but also starting to increase with that whole awareness of childlessness as well, not by choice, in the workplace and the impact of that. So we thought it was timely to do a webinar on that topic, because it's starting to take shape around the world. And we're going to go around. So the three of us are going to share a little bit about us, what our experiences have been in the workplace, and perhaps a little bit about our story, in case you don't know it from the Full Stop podcast. If you've not met us over there, then we can do that too. And then we'll pause and we'll do a Q&A. We'll catch up on any questions, so feel free to add them to the Q&A box and we'll pick up from there. And then we'll go around again, perhaps with some advice and some things that we've learned along the way. We're not aiming to give you a magic wand, to give you the tools, because our situations are so diverse, but what we'd like to do is give you just a few kind of resources and ideas and our experiences, and keep chatting to us and keep using that Q&A box, and we'll pause again at the end and we'll take some more questions and answers. Does that sound okay to everybody?
Yeah.
It's only you three, isn't it, really?
Yeah,
That's three. I can't count. Good. So who wants to kick off?
Guys, we can't edit this, it's live.
It's live. Michael, you're going first.
Am I?
You're first.
Oh no.
Yeah, you are. Go on.
No. All right,
Maybe
who am I?
okay.
Okay. I'm Michael Hughes. I'm 1/3 of a podcast, 1/2 of a childless marriage, and have been constantly thinking about us, and I say that collectively as us, as our community, and how we can influence workplaces, which I'm doing at this very moment. Because back about 20 years ago, and about 35 kilos, when I actually did physical work, I remember an instance where I was chatting to one of my friends at work, saying, you know, about our plight and, you know, going through IVF and things like that. And the best he could do was say, mate, all I've got to do is put my pants over the bedhead. She's pregnant. And at the time, it didn't register, because I've always been a bit of a slow learner, but it sort of just shows that there's absolutely no concept, and I'm probably talking to the converted anyway, but absolutely no concept of our plight. And recently, as in Thursday this week, we actually had an online training session from the diversity and inclusion section of the Australian government, and the section escapes me right now. But They talked about social identity and how, you know, you bring that to your workplace. And at no point was there the recognition of our plight. So I've taken it upon myself to go, right, we've got to sort this out. And I've got the email of the actual chap at the government, and we're going to have some words, talk, that sounds a bit antagonistic. We're going to communicate about this, because I want to say to him that you have forgotten a huge amount of the Australian community here, huge. So yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. But I will rabbit on for ages. So who's next?
I'll go if you like. Good for you though, getting out there and bringing that up, giving us a voice. I love that. So my experience was I was employed for a long time, you know, in financial services. My experiences of difficulties at work, so hopefully this isn't a trigger for anyone, but I actually had a miscarriage, and I had a male boss who had children. He just could not cope with anything that I was taking into the office. It was really difficult to have a conversation with him. It was really difficult to get any support. In fact, I went to my doctors because I kind of fell apart, and they said, "Oh, we'll put stress, work-related stress on your certificate rather than actual reason why." I think it was to be helpful, but actually it didn't really help. And then unfortunately, later on down the track, I was told I couldn't have children, and I fell apart again. And again, I had a male boss, and it wasn't really a conversation I felt I could have. They sort of said I could go to HR. His boss was female, so I ended up talking to her about it, but all ends up really very unsupportive. Wasn't really an experience that I enjoyed. And then third time, lucky me, after my hysterectomy, another male boss who was younger than me, didn't have children, and by that time I'd kind of lost any sense of, you know, embarrassment. And so I was telling him about all sorts and giving myself 50 bonus points every time I made him blush talking about my stuff, because I was just like, you know, been it, seen it, done, I don't care anymore. I realised I've not introduced myself. I can probably do that later. But yeah, so that was my experience, and all ends up very embarrassing, very difficult, lots of shame, lots of stuff that's not acknowledged, being signed off for things that weren't the actual reality. So yeah, all very difficult, I think, but self-employed now, so it's different. But yeah, that's my experience.
My experience is I've done, I hope nothing here is a trigger for anybody, but to give context, I've been through IVF. I went through it 6 times. The first 5 times I was working in a agency, quite a high pressure job. And the guy who ran it was ex-Fleet Street, so ruthless. You know, every other word in the office was an expletive. And I can remember kind of going through it all and thinking I was in it to get the maternity pay, even though actually it didn't have any benefits themselves. It was the government maternity pay. So I kept going through it with this sort of misguided notion that I would come out of it sort of better and it would all work and great, lovely. And actually the job itself didn't really help at all. His sister had been through IVF and it failed. And I remember him saying to me, "Oh, well, it failed and they got a dog." And at the time I thought, well, it can't. So it completely skewed everything. It made everything quite complicated in my head. And it was mostly actually the environment that I was in was a lot of guys there who were kind of single or just settled down, still kind of, you know, exploring life, weren't married. And I actually sort of fell in a lot more with them. Historically, I've always sort of got on better, I think, with male friendships than female friendships, until I discovered in the community that we have now. And now I've got some very close female friendships, but I stayed away from them very much during my working environment because I was worried they would all get pregnant. And in fact, one woman who worked there did get pregnant at the time that my first IVF cycle was cancelled because I had ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. And she thought, of course, it was going to work. So she came in with cake and everything, and I'm pregnant, and asked me to go to her antenatal classes with her because her partner was, her husband was away traveling quite a lot. And I fell apart in the car park that day. And actually the guy who I worked with, fellow art director who worked alongside me, he was actually amazing. He sort of pulled me back together again. In some kind of strange way, enough to get me back into the office to get the stuff to go home. But that was the only time I ever went home. And I can remember being in the workplace one morning when I had embryo transfer. They rung up from the clinic, and of course there's no warning with this, you just go in. And I arrived at work early in the morning because I always got there early. I did way more hours than I ever should have done. And the boss said to me, you can't go and do that. You can't go and do that because your accounts will be at risk. You know, we've got stuff to get out today. Wait, how the F do you go off and do that today? You can't. And I thought, okay, well, that's it. I'm just going to leave because actually that's more important. Your attitude sucks. I just walk out. Couldn't afford to walk out because we were paying for IVF privately. But I thought, I can't do this anymore. You know, I can't put myself into two places, and I actually don't particularly care about your company anymore. I don't really care about my job. And I went, packed everything up, and actually he came down the stairs and he actually hugged me, which I think is probably slightly inappropriate, really, but actually he genuinely thought, yeah, he crossed the line, I think, at that particular point. But it kind of made me think, okay, I'm doing this for all the wrong reasons. Went through that cycle, got pregnant, I miscarried. Then I left the company because of ethical reasons. They turned over a load of freelancers by unethical means that I'm not going to go into, but it's all highly unethical. And I left, and I got a job working for a big publisher in London, famous for their bird logo. And I loved that job, but I was working in a quite small department, and they're very lovely people. I work with those three of them still very, very well. But they were all parents. And I went through one cycle, IVF cycle, when I was there, and it was impossible to keep it quiet. You know, I had to get on the train. I was commuting from my home, and I had to get on the train in order to go home to do the injection. I had to get on that train. If I didn't get on that train, I would be in the station, in the toilets on the train. I had to do that. So I couldn't really keep it as quiet as I wanted to. And of course, their hopes got up. They sort of heard about it. Someone got arsy about me taking a Friday off because they wanted to give me kind of, you know, an opportunity. Although it was all a bit cat-handed, they tried. And they got arsy about it. Then they found out that the reason why, and oh, it's going to work, you know, all that kind of hope in them. And I remember when I got pregnant, I was pregnant for all of September, and they were hopeful. Oh, you're going to need, you know, you need a winter coat. I remember that conversation, the winter coat conversation. You won't need one because you're going to be hot, because you're going to be pregnant, you know, and you're going to, you know, you won't need that. It sticks out on your head somehow. And I don't know why that sticks out. It just does, because it was the hope. And the thing that I found the most difficult was going back into the workplace. I couldn't cope with my feelings around everything, were complicated, but the thing that added that extra level of dread was going back into the office and facing them. And actually there just went, and someone said to me, when I got back on, I finally got back in and summoned up that courage. When I said, I feel so guilty for having my children. And I don't care about your guilt. That's your problem, not mine. But I just fell apart. You know, I didn't know how to deal with that. And shortly after that, actually, I got made redundant. And I had enough money just about to scrape together, if I could, for an IVF cycle. And actually, I went and did a master's degree in graphic design. And one of the things that I've often talked about is how design saved my life. It's posted behind me, but design will save the world if rock and roll doesn't first. Is the rest of it, you can't quite see it behind me. But design saved my life because it gave me my identity. But that was my experience, really. And I think the redundancy probably actually wasn't such a bad thing in some respects, maybe. But that's, yeah, my experience really of working in the pronatal workplace.
Wow. So yeah, a spread of experiences there, really, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? So we've paused for a minute because there's a
Question come in.
question come in, and we'll answer that. If anyone's got any questions at this point, do feel free to ask. We don't give out names, everything's anonymous, and none of that information is saved on the webinar, so we won't read out names or anything. It's all confidential. So the question that we've got is, since the start of the pandemic, my male boss, married with kids, has wanted to spread good news. This included sending baby birth announcements, including photos around to staff. Oh my God, I hate that. Oh, I'm not swearing because it's going everywhere, but oh my.
Yeah, really
yeah. How? Any advice on how to tell him how inappropriate and triggering this is? Okay.
I think that's really tough, actually. I think back to when I was in an employed place, it's really tough to have those conversations, isn't it? But I wonder how approachable he is.
Yeah.
Whether you can have that conversation with him, or perhaps if he's not approachable, perhaps something through HR saying, actually, this isn't working, and these perhaps talking a little bit about World Childless Week if you don't want to talk about your own stuff. These are the reasons why. Yeah.
I think the conversations that I've seen happening in the wider community have been around gender and equality networks, and I've fed into a couple. We'll talk about it a bit more later, but perhaps that's another approach as well. If there is such a thing where you are, they might be someone that perhaps you could talk to and ask them whether there's any opportunity to bring in some kind of policy or something around that, some gentle advice, if you don't feel it's something that you can do yourself, because it is giving away something of you, isn't it? I always find that when someone sends something through like that, and if you respond to that on an email, for example, you do reply all, then everyone knows. If you do reply, you've got to have that confidence, and that information's got to be how they interpret it, what you're saying as well. And if they just dismiss that as well, is also a difficult thing too. I think, either a gender thing or perhaps gender equality network, or I think, you're right, Sarah. I think that human resources is always a good place to go, because they should be keeping that information confidential if you don't feel it's something you can do yourself. That's highly, highly inappropriate, but God, it happens so often, doesn't it?
Yeah, I've had stories from friends on WhatsApp chats, and I forget the name of the other platform lots of businesses use, where you're having like these chats, and then bang, all of a sudden there's a photograph or a scanned photograph or something, and it just knocks you sideways, doesn't it? Because it's kind of, you're in a work environment talking about work, and then all of a sudden that pops in. So I can't even begin to imagine how distressing that is, actually.
I've had an incident over the summer. Two incidents that happened with me was because I work on a contract a couple of days a week, and I had sitting here, because I do it only part-time, the rest of my time is all to do with working for myself or my own business. Like you, I run my own company, and I had someone just say to me, how are you getting on with your children? So I don't have children. Yeah, that's not why I do what I do. I do it for other reasons. It's not because of, you automatically assume something. But in the course of all of that meeting later on, someone just sort of, and I'm pregnant. And I knew, because of just knowing these things, that there was somebody else on that call who was going to be triggered. I knew that because I know of their story, and it was kind of handling how I felt, which was slightly distanced, because I don't actually have to go into these things that often, but knowing that she has to go into this, she's on that team and she's employed by that company. And of course, the automatic thing is, for all the people that either have yet to have children and those that have children, we're all, and of course it's in a 5-minute conversation, possibly, and it's revisited, of course, later on as well at various points. So it's not as if it's the beginning of the meeting where people go, and it's all over. It comes up again and again and again, recurring in that conversation, and then subsequent meetings again. And it's not it then starts to blur those boundaries, because if you are working from home, how I'm sitting here in this room was actually meant to be the playroom for my kids. So it all then starts to seep in somewhere, doesn't it? I think as well. And I think that inappropriateness of and those boundaries is, it's not recognised, is it? It just isn't there.
No, well, we've got a couple of things in the chat, actually. We found issues with homeworking, babies probably / children too, being brought into Zoom calls. Yeah, I get that a lot. So obviously I'm not employed now, I'm self-employed, but I do a lot of training, and they'd be like, oh, well, I'm working from home, and then, you know, a child comes in and everything just goes zip, and everyone goes, oh, you know, and you're just like trying to rein it in, trying to bring it back again, isn't it? It's so difficult trying to get yourself back together and go, right, okay, no, do I acknowledge? Do I ignore? Do I sort of say, restate the boundaries and say, actually, can we not? It's so difficult, I think.
I read something somewhere a while ago on, don't know, doesn't matter what platform it was, but it was again a query about this, and it was from somebody who was was a freelancer, was doing training, and she said that her method of dealing with it is actually to set it up from the beginning. You know, this, if it's not appropriate for you because you're doing childcare or you're going to be interrupted, then please arrange another time with me when you won't be interrupted, and set the boundaries out in everything, and let them sort of deal with it. Because actually the other thing that she'd also said was she charges extra. So, you know, she's like, okay, you know, if we're and I think, you know, if you are in that position where you're delivering the training or whatever it is you're doing, and you get interrupted, and sort of like she said, oh, well, that's 5 minutes, I'll add that on, you know, and if it goes over to a certain point, she said, well, that's a whole hour extra charge for, because actually, you know, the people who are doing this aren't paying attention, and they need to. So that maybe is another way of looking at it, but it's lot, isn't it?
I have done that, but it depends on the context, I think, and the client that you're working for. So I can see in some instances that would be appropriate, but sometimes you have to balance it carefully, I think. But lots of chat in the conversation at the moment about photographs and emails. Oh gosh, that's the worst, isn't it? Oh, I work in a mental health team. There is no awareness in our team. Oh my goodness, really?
Well, I was going to actually say something there, because that same training session I went to on Thursday, it was about gender equality at work, and it started to then veer off to paternity leave, and then because it was all males in the call except for the facilitator was a female. And anyway, started talking about paternity leave, and then they started talking about how that would have been good back, 30 years ago when my kids were growing up, because, I missed out so much because I was working so hard, blah, blah, blah. At the end of it, I said, look, we're sitting here talking about inclusion, and I'm not trying to beat this over the head of you people, but I feel excluded from this conversation. And I would imagine you could hear a pin drop after that. I got a little bit emotional, as I do now. But I said, look, as a person who doesn't have children and considers himself childless not by choice, I have felt excluded from this conversation. So what I want to highlight to everyone here is that we need to be always thinking about inclusion. And I recognise that this is not seen, from the general population. But I just want you to know we're having a conversation about inclusion, and I'm feeling excluded. Now, what I'm getting to is that, in a long-winded way, but I'm old now, so I can do that, is all is not lost, because the repercussions of what I did actually caused a number of men, remember they're all guys, thank you. you've opened my eyes to something that I'd never, ever considered, never, ever thought. One guy went to as far as apologised for mentioning his children. And I said, mate, look, it's okay. It's fine. But it's just, it's the fact that, we're talking about inclusion. You weren't to know, but there's many things when we talk about inclusion that we need to start to consider. And our company does not consider this one. And I'm working on that as well. But yeah, so what I'm trying to say is all is not lost. So just from me saying, I feel excluded, it actually started another conversation. So sometimes it may, obviously each circumstance is different, but sometimes it may not be as bad as you think it's going to be, if that makes sense.
I'd agree with that actually, because I did a talk about 2 months ago to the Gender and Equality Network for Cambridge University, and it was scary. I mean, I think probably I would say, like you, Michael, I've sort of become more able to share my story. I'm not going to ever say that everyone should be able to do that, because I don't think that that's possible. I mean, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even probably, certainly pre-podcast and certainly Childless Week, I wouldn't have been able to do that. But I kind of thought something's got to happen, because it was just getting to the point of just ridiculousness. There was so much stuff around. They had a survey about pay and pay levels and about the word family, and that was the bit that kind of got me really, really angry, because it was this whole idea of family. Oh, come on, the definition of family in this survey was kids. And so I put it to the gender equality team that were existing, and I said, look, actually, I want to try and do something around this, because this is me, this is my story, this is what I do, here's the podcast, here's World Childless Week, this is it needs talking about. And actually what I found was a really good and positive response. In fact, one of the people on the gender and equality thing is actually a stepmom, and can't have her own children. So she's like, yeah, okay, we need to do that. And I wouldn't necessarily it went as well. It went okay in that I gave them some tips, some advice, again, around, when you're stuff like when you bring your baby to work, if you're going to do that, then arrange it maybe in a cafe or somewhere. If you've got a coffee shop or an area, a meeting area in your space where you're working, do it there so that people have the choice. They don't have to go along to these things. It's not obligatory. It's not round their desk. Because someone mentioned actually yesterday on Twitter, actually a conversation on Twitter I picked up on about the baby danglers, the ones that come and they dangle their child over your desk, and how triggering that can be. So avoiding the baby dangling, I think. How you're sharing that information around. And also, if you're told something about being childless, then to honour that and respect that conversation, and don't kind of start to share it around as well. And it was that kind of what I hate using business terminology, but what I called the low-hanging fruit, the easy stuff that people can do to make it just a little bit more aware. But what I found was that actually what I got was an awful lot of people talking about secondary infertility. But I did get, like you, Michael, I got apologies for behaviours, and a subsequent conversation I had out with the freelancers, lifestylers, and a lady called Emma Ward, who has a child of her own, but it was a freelance group, because I think freelance and business groups also have triggers. I think they're terrible. There actually is a podcast called Doing It for the Kids. I've got to get on that podcast, because I really want to tell them what it's like from the other side. But again, they're not immune to that too. But again, it's that kind of like, okay, changing language and being more inclusive. Because you're right, it is about, gender and diversity is all meant to be about that kind of idea of diversity. But as Jodie Day says in many of her talks, childlessness not by choice is the biggest diversity issue that HR have never heard of. And I think perhaps maybe it takes just an email, and World Childless Week is an ideal opportunity, I think, to do that. If people feel that they can, to just say, look, actually, this is a diversity thing in my workplace and it needs talking about. And there's, even if you can't do it, there are other people out there who would possibly be able to come in and talk about that too. But it's tricky. Yeah,
I did that for World Childless Week for my. So I work for Australia's largest construction materials company, and fantastic company. They have a really good diversity council, except no one in Childless in it right now, but I'm working on that.
Good.
But what I was able to do was share World Childless Week and share my story on the Works intranet. And I put a couple of examples in as to why this is a diversity issue. One of them was a pregnancy announcement. While everyone's fussing over the mother-to-be, which is okay, rightly so, there were, with the amount of the percentage of our population who are in our position, there's bound to be someone who will excuse themselves off to the bathroom or the stairwell and release their grief. The other example I put in there was how companies encourage family photo walls. So I said to them in my writing, I said, so imagine if you're a childless person and every day starts with walking past that wall. And again, I actually got quite a large number of personal messages from that, from women in the organisation who said, wow, thank you. I've got some really, really touching stories from other childless people. And I found that was a good way of doing it. So I'm advertising World Childless Week, whacking in a couple of general examples, not so much about me, and that actually worked really well because it obviously distanced me personally, but at the same time got the message across. And that they are two that I'm going to use, to the nth degree. And I don't care if people think I'm repeating myself, because I think they're good. They're really, they really, tell our story, I think.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I know for a fact that when I was working employed, there was no way I was sharing my story. So I as long, if I had an exit strategy, I'd make sure I could see an exit door, the stairwell, the toilet, if something like that triggered me. But there's no way I'd be sharing it. But I think now I would. I mean, I've since gone back to my employer as a counsellor for ATS and done a piece about it, and they were going to be setting up a network and they were getting HR involved. I don't know whether it happened, but it was interesting seeing the diversity of the faces in the room that I spoke to, and the fact that they have no voice through the issue that was uniting us in that room as it stood at that moment. And I think, Michael, what you're doing is you're standing up and saying, I'll be your mouthpiece. And it's always useful to have somebody that's prepared to do that. That might be a little bit further down the journey, but it is setting up that network, isn't it? Having that voice.
Yeah, there's also something I'd like to explore, and I can only speak for Australia, but and now I know being childless, won't be in the psychological book of disorders or whatever it's called. I can't remember what it's called now, but it's been a long time since I studied that. But so the Occupational Health and Safety Act in Australia actually says that it is the employer's obligation to provide a safe workplace. And that can be interpreted obviously physically and mentally. So if you're finding it hard, what I would say, because I'm looking at some of the questions here about, how do we, challenge these pronatalist assumptions and things like that. What I would do is I'd hit up HR and say, look, that I'm being excluded, I'm being excluded in a workplace. And I would also say that, that it is a mental challenge and therefore sits under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Now, of course, that's only for Australia, but I don't think that's far out. That's not a pie in the sky sort of thing. I think that's relevant, absolutely relevant.
I think it is too. I mean, I think the more the conversations are around diversity and equality, then actually you can time and time again, just from this chat alone, but the examples that everyone's got are exclusion, and it's not equality. It is not diversity. It's putting people in a box and locking them away and not talking about something, and it has to be spoken about. It's trying to speak about it, I think, is so hard. I think that's the hardest thing. I can remember vividly the very first time I shared something about World Childless Week, and I went back to my desk and I sat there all day like a cat on hot bricks, because and I hadn't actually, my if someone had looked at the website, they would have known, and under the ambassadors I was there. So it was very much more public, I think, for me. That was a kind of big sort of, oh God, okay, they go online. But I didn't speak about it. I just put it up there and went, put the poster up, great, see what happens. And what I expected was everyone was going to go over it going, oh my God, what's this? And actually they didn't, no one much did, but it's also quite disappointing. It was a bit bittersweet. You kind of hope that they would, but also hope that they wouldn't. But it kind of got me over that feeling, that slightly sicky feeling of having to do something like that. But yeah, it's a diversity thing. My aim was that there's this amazing guy called Martin Silby. I'm digressing slightly, but Martin Silby runs an agency called Purple Goat, and it's all to do with addressing advertising agencies on inequality of a disability. And it's amazing. The work he does is fantastic. And I would love, my aim would be just to actually have childlessness actually down as an exclusion, as a policy, as a actual documented thing, so that actually we could go along, whether that's the podcast, whether it's the community, whether it's World Childless Week, and go along and say, actually, okay, this is illegal. Actually say it's illegal. I'm quite sure that within policies and HR things, it probably is illegal. I'm sure it probably is. But nobody should have to go through that, because you're not getting the best from the people you're working with. And as I say, it extends outside the workplace. I see it so often in business networks as well. A few I've educated. I've done quite a bit of work with a network called Drive the Network, and also the freelance lifestylers, and just sort of saying, actually, this is the thing. I do World Childless Week, but I also do a podcast. This is the podcast. And, in your community of your business owners, there's actually quite a lot of us who are Plan Bs, because we didn't get the support that we wanted when we were in the workplace, because it all got too much for us, because we had mental health issues and we left. And actually, that's great if we've successfully, or we're happy in our Plan B, but also the upside is that there are companies out there who are losing bloody good employees because they're not providing actually some very simple boundary setting. It's not difficult to say, okay, there's a baby shower going on, we're going to hold it over here at this time if you don't want to go, but at least or that you have the choice perhaps to work from home on that day, because it's in the diary, about it, blah-de-blah's bringing in Sprog and I'll work from home. Or that whoever knows about it puts it in the diary so you can accept, not accept, and you can go somewhere else, go and take your lunch break, go and take a walk, but you've got the freedom to do that. You have, for me, it's all about choice. If you give people choices, then they're respected. And if you don't, then yeah. Anyway, should we look at some of the questions and answers? I
was just going to have a look at the chat, actually. There's a couple of things that have piqued my interest. So someone said, does anyone else have the experience of being expected to pick up the work because they don't have children, and that people with children can't do it? And then there's this phenomena on LinkedIn where it doesn't really get mentioned, because obviously LinkedIn becomes part of the workplace as well, doesn't it, in a way now that we're all working from home or we're self-employed, etc. So there's a couple of things there that we might be able to pick up on. How do you feel? How do you feel about picking up the one where people without children are expected to pick up the slack almost?
There's a lot of conversations going on, I think, about output and hours at the moment, and about your output, the quality of what you do rather than the time of what you put into it. So that focus of work, kind of riffing this a little bit, because I think that we're all, if you're in employment, you've got your job description, you've got your hours, your quality of life. And I think perhaps it depends a little maybe on, perhaps on your working hours, I think on your ability to do what you're doing, and also within the boundaries of what your job description is as well. to, and perhaps your company's definition, maybe going back to that thing of family, you know, because you have commitments of your own. They're not kids, but you may have elderly parents, you may have a partner, you may have pets, but actually also you've got yourself. You are a family. You are enough to say that. And I have huge issues over that. I was in that position in the company that I left, but I haven't been in it in other positions recently. But I'm also very conscious that when I've overworked myself for various demands, that my ability to work effectively has diminished because I'm knackered, can't do it. My brain stops functioning. Never mind the unfairness of it all. It's you're not effective. No one's effective if they're in burnout state. And I think an awful lot of that is put to bear on all of us, because that assumption is that, you know, our family isn't as important, and it is so damn unfair.
I mean, I was a manager before I left employment, and I had members of my team that had children, I had members that didn't, but I was always, it's got to be fair. It's got to be, Christmas was always a sensitive subject. I mean, Christmas is never my favourite time of year, but it was always the assumption that those of us without children would be there because we didn't have a family. But my take on it was, I will provide what I can, but actually it comes down to fairness. So it was, you know, if there were two people that wanted it, one with family, one without, you know, that perception, it would still be a case of, I would still consider the person without the traditional idea of family in the same way as the person with, and we would come to some sort of compromise so that people were pulling equal weight. It really, you know, grinds my gears when I hear that people say, well, there's this expectation that on holidays and things like that, we're expected to pick up the slack. And again, if we were recognised under the diversity, that wouldn't be an issue. I think it's about us, I guess, speaking up if we think it's unfair.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky one though, very, very difficult, I would say.
I think that it was easier for me once I'd been through that last Ivf cycle. It opened eyes, however painful it was for people and for me. I think it opened up a few eyes. There was one person that didn't get it, who complained constantly about the fact that I was treated the same as her and she had 2 children. Some people don't get it, they just won't. And I firmly believe that that's their loss and their ignorance. Just, you know, I can't swear, but you know, it's their ignorance, you know. But I think that opened up a few eyes to perhaps equality and around, things like Christmas. Most companies that I've worked for tend to shut down completely anyway. But if I've got the holiday, I'll use it. I think that's important. Yeah,
definitely. Somebody else has sort of mentioned as well the times of COVID. COVID leave currently for parents to homeschool their children, more benefits we don't have access to. I think it's so difficult. We're starting going into territory, aren't we, of them versus us?
Yeah.
And I think that's really difficult territory, because I kind of think that we should be, you know, Michael's speaking up to almost educate and make them aware rather than say it's them versus us. And I think I've been guilty of it as well. Oh, this is unfair, this is outrageous. But I think it kind of comes down to us finding other people, building a network and having that mouthpiece and saying, look, it's more than just me, it's all of us. And then it doesn't feel quite so them and us. I think it's kind of, that for me is a bit abrasive, isn't it? I don't know what you guys think about it, but I think we should be trying to, I'm saying this being further down the track. When I first started, it was very much me versus parents. But I think now, actually I see World Childless Week, I see what we do with the podcast, trying to bridge that gap and educate people, you know, into their blind spots and how it impacts on us.
My term is parental allies. So all the things that I've done in terms of speaking out have been, I use this phrase called same storm, different boats. And I've used it a lot because I encounter quite a lot in business networks, certainly the last sort of couple of years, where they are homeschooling. And I can't begin to imagine how awful that is. If you're trying to run your business and you've got kids at home needing stuff, and you're also, or if you're in an office and you're trying to work from home and do that too, it's different. It's so difficult. It's different. It's not what people are used to. It's the same storm, COVID, different boat. And I think that for me, it's having a conversation, as you say, Sarah, where we're saying, okay, yeah, you've got your problem. Now this is mine, but actually it's not that dissimilar. It really isn't. Just that my distractions, my issues are different. I've not actually heard of Pacific COVID leave for parents. Actually, that's a new one for me today. I didn't know about that. I think that's grim, and I don't think that that's right. And I think it's a miseducation. And I think it's about informing the people that set these things up and saying, well, actually, you know, these are the things that I've been through. Because, you know, so we've all got, is that definition, it goes back to the definition of family again, and what constitutes fair leave. In fact, it pops up again on the questions as well, if someone's pointing out that, that they had a 3-month medical leave for a hysterectomy and was told, I hope you enjoyed your long break because you won't be able to have a break that long again, which made me think why can't childless persons have long paid leave? I agree. I think, again, it's an inequality and, again, a diversity thing. Because you should be entitled to a sabbatical. I think some companies have it after so many years. And I kind of don't, I don't know about you guys, but I think the whole thing of maternity and paternity leave, I kind of park it over there as being, that's their thing. It's not, I don't want, it's like the whole thing of paternity leave, which I think is all a bit difficult. I had a difficult conversation with my mother about that, but it's kind of a separate thing. I think it's almost like we need to create our own phrases and our own things and say, okay, this is why I need the leave because of this, not to muddle those words and that language up somewhere along the line, but to create our own reasons for that leave, or have our reasons for that leave and give it a name, a sabbatical, or whatever you want to term it, but that it's actually equally appropriated to you rather than just because you are seen as, yeah, your commitments are less, if you like, which they're not.
No, not at all. It's oh god, it's so difficult. That story about the leave for the hysterectomy, I completely chime with that. I left. I didn't go back for a while because I had mental health problems after my hysterectomy, and I went back tanned because I did a lot of walking for my mental health. And then somebody went, "You're looking very healthy," and it's just like, if only you knew. So yeah, I completely chime with what you're saying. Yeah, do you know what? I was just like, I don't care anymore. I said, well, I've been off with depression, and they went, you've never seen someone retreat so quickly, but it didn't feel great that I had to disclose that.
Yeah, you're giving something of yourself, and I think that is always the thing. I think with all these questions here that we're having in the chat is that you're giving away something that's quite private. You're saying something to somebody who may go next week out into the world somewhere, go and work somewhere else. You know, the whole idea of that, you know, being family, you know, how many of us really keep in touch with work colleagues after our job in that way? I want to pick up a bit on LinkedIn because LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'm watching the chat as we're chatting.
Yeah, I'm sort of conscious of the time as well. We could do another hour here, couldn't we? I think easily.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going nowhere. I'm in lockdown, so let's just keep going.
You are. So I think yeah, LinkedIn is
such a phenomenon in itself. Someone's commented on here actually saying the number of photographs of children popping up. Yeah, I've noticed that as well. It's kind of, there's this real push at the moment for LinkedIn to be a bit more, I don't know, the whole story,
authentic
of us, and it's just like, oh no.
Oh. Anyway, God, I'm trying so hard to swear today. God, I'm actually on. So the first thing I'm going to say is that I'm on LinkedIn. So if you want to find me, anyone that's on the chat here, you want to come and find me, I'm on LinkedIn. Berenice Howard Smith. Come and connect with me because I will back you up 100%. I've started talking about it. So I share my narrative a bit. So I kind of do like I suppose 4 posts will be about my company, what I do. In fact, the full stop is also on LinkedIn too, so you can come and find us on that as well. We've got a LinkedIn page. And I do every 4 or 5 posts will be about the company, and I might put in a paragraph somewhere in that might connect it back to something to do with the podcast. Or I might advertise. In fact, I do now. I now advertise a podcast episode when we've done something. It pops up on my LinkedIn feed, and I've started to slowly share that narrative not in the way that I might do, say, on other social media. I'm much more open about that on Twitter. But the thing that's really pisses me off, annoys me about, that's not too bad, mild swear. The thing that really annoys me about LinkedIn is that you can't mute it. And I'm constantly on Twitter kind of going onto LinkedIn support and going, we need to have a facility to mute the words, because what you can't do, Twitter, I can curate. So we have a list on the Full Stop podcast. So you can follow the list of all the guests that we've had on the podcast. You can follow the list of all of the people who are on World Childless Week ambassadors. You follow the list, and you don't have to see anything else. The trouble with LinkedIn, there's a lot of trouble with LinkedIn, but one of the things with LinkedIn is that you can't mute, so you get triggered before you can hide, which is just totally, utterly ridiculous. And I think that impedes people's mental health quite badly. And I kind of have an issue with this whole sharing of stuff, because actually your image rights, LinkedIn take ownership of all of those photographs. So in 10 years time, when little kidlet has grown up and they've seen that their parent has used their picture for some ridiculous moral dictatorial they're not going to be happy about that. It's not like you're sharing a picture of a child in the bath to your auntie Viv and over a cup of tea on the sofa. This is actually going out to the world, to everybody. There is a whole issue, I think, over people's privacy, and I worry about that. I think it's wrong. But I struggle. I mean, I'm not against removing connections. I'm very much of the mindset now, as I've got older, that I'm as ruthless on LinkedIn as I am on Facebook, on Twitter, or anything. If someone is triggering me because of their content, your connection's gone, because you obviously haven't read my bio. People rarely do. And I don't want to see that. So you're gone, you're out, mute, gone, disappear. And I will block and mute if I can. But unfortunately, you have to have that trigger first in order to then do and know that you've got to do that. And I think that's a really backwards way around about doing it. So I think with LinkedIn, if you're going into it, make sure you've got a cup of tea, make sure you've got some support with you. And if you've got someone just to chat to, because you may find, as I have to do even now, I have to take a deep breath and go in and deal with LinkedIn. It's not the same as I approach Twitter. It's not the same as I approach Instagram, because I can't mute stuff. So I think gird your loins a little bit as well. It's an appropriate phrase for the chat, but you know what I mean? You get your strength going and then go in and deal with it and then come out, but make sure you're in that place and have that support around you.
Yeah.
Talking about strength. Sorry, Sarah, you go ahead.
No, you go for it.
Talking about strength. We're hearing there's a lot of stuff in the chat here about people talking up at work. And, I'm a big, as you guess, advocate for educating people. I like to take a bit more of a positive mindset and just think, well, they just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Unless you're absolutely malicious, well, that's a whole different story. But one of the things that I learned a while back is that the power actually sits with you when you tell a story. So it's about a paradigm shift as well. We don't want to share a story because we want to, we're afraid of shame and embarrassment. But what I found so far is that when I tell a story, I now have the power, because people are sophisticated enough to know that you're telling them something quite important. And so the power shifts to you. And we hear lots of people saying, I felt empowered when I spoke up. I felt it was almost like a release. So for those of us who are somewhat hesitant right now, trust the comments that you're seeing here. Trust what's coming this way, and look at their responses. They're saying, yeah, I spoke up at work, and people were like, wow. So don't let it stop you. Tell your story, and the power will sit with you.
think also be aware sometimes you can't change minds, and people might react in a very defensive way. They may feel guilt, they may wriggle in uncomfortableness, as we've all sort of experienced that, I think, as well. And go out and get some support. I think one of the greatest and most wonderful and brilliant things about the chat here, but about World Childless Week and about actually with the podcast as well, is that our friendships are so deep. We may not know you in person. Sarah and Michael have never met in person, but our roots are so deep. So if you're sitting there in your workplace and you're thinking, I want to do this, and you're worried, and it doesn't go the way perhaps you want it to, or perhaps that person goes away when they're defensive with you and you get nothing, or you get that tumbleweed, you're setting a seed, you've given a little something just to give people something, and they can go away and they can think, because it's actually a big thing to talk about. It's actually unraveling a lot of people's conceptions about things. You know, when I've said to people that, you know, the data on male infertility is not there, as Robin Hadley speaks on his fantastic website, it's not there. And you can hear a pin drop when you say that. Every time I've said it. And if you say that 72% of IVF cycles fail, pin drop. You know, I say that, you know, openly now, I would say I've had PTSD because of it. And it's not that people don't listen, it's that they don't necessarily know what to say. You know, and they may come up with a fix. You know, the fix is the head tilt, you know, and going back to the webinar I was on last night, you tried adoption, and on all those sorts of things. And I think at that point you can say, well, actually, no, that's not what I'm telling you for. This is not the reason. The reason is this. It's to raise awareness of something that actually is very painful and very private and very personal to me, but needs to be talked about in a wider context. But make sure you've got that friendship around you. You know, on this chat today, you're building a friendship. You're building a network by talking to us and the people that are in that chat too. So find that network. You know, come and find us on social media if you want. If you've done something like that and you think, oh God, I just need to talk to somebody, hook up with us. Tell us, you know, and we'll be there. You know, not maybe immediately, but we'll be around and we'll come and talk to you as well. Just get those friendships there. There's so many support groups out there, just to give you a little bit of mental strength afterwards, because it takes courage, it takes huge guts to do that, and it's amazing if you can.
It does. I'm just looking at the comments where people are sort of saying, oh, I'd love to be able to do that, I've got to do this, but you need to work through your own stuff first.
Yeah.
I was not shouting from the rooftops about my story until I'd worked through it myself.
Yeah.
So don't feel, I guess what I'm saying is, don't feel under pressure to share until you're ready. Yeah. And then when you do feel ready, that's when you share your voice and your story. But don't feel under pressure to do it if you're not there yet. Yeah. I know I wasn't at the beginning. I certainly wasn't when I was employed. It came later. Yeah,
I had to cut that distance, that boundary, and I had to do all of that self-forgiveness first, which I'm still working on. God, I'm not immune to that. I think that, you know, it's still work in progress. I think it will be lifelong. But I had to kind of build that a bit too, to create I always keep referencing, and everything I've done lately, I've been referencing Bindi Shah and her meditation, and she goes to this a ball of light and this kind of armor that you build, and it's connecting this bit to this bit, and all of that grief work as well, which is, it's still ongoing. And it took me 10 years, and actually firstly going through a job share and then removing myself and going back in a different way, in a different capacity, to be able to do that and to say something. It's so individual and it's so personal, I think, to you, how you do it, your approach to it, whether you take an indirect view and when by World Childless Week, or whether it's just not the thing you want to do. But I think give yourself those choices as well. And yeah, it's a tricky one. Work is so incredibly intrusive, I think, and it's very difficult, but it might take you time. Say it's 10 years, in fact, probably 12, 13 years, I think, and slowly getting gobbier. But even then, I would say I'm still triggered. It's
Yeah.
not without, I've been that person that's even I think 2 or 3 years ago, someone did the baby dangling and I had to go and sit in the loos for a bit and walk out, just go for a walk. And actually, weirdly, one of the people that caught me was actually a friend of mine who is a mum. But she'd been there and we've known each other for years. And even she said, oh God, it's so tedious. This, this stuff with these parents coming in. And she's just like, she was fed up with it. So sometimes you might find actually it's the most unusual people. And it's just, and she's just sort of so damn unfair on you.
But I mean, let's be honest. I mean, how many people like other people's children? Not really. If they're honest, and
actually there's some amusement I find sometimes when I go onto some of these calls and these meetings, and of course there's parental one-upmanship, because and I think, oh God, how dull is that, and how actually toxic that is. It's quite toxic.
It is
actually, and I think I don't get that with our network. Ed, I feel the love from the chat and from you guys and how lovely that is, and it's not toxic. And I think, God, how horrible to be in that position where you're having to use your child again. LinkedIn, isn't it? Oh, my child went out and saved 5 pensioners today, and then someone else will come and go, oh, but my child saved 5 cats and 4 dogs and a pensioner, and you think, oh my God, how? Oh
yeah, it's the thing. It's the thing where they go, oh, they were reading War and Peace at 5 months.
Yes.
And, get back in your box.
How boring are you? And what do I know about you? And I think actually I know nothing about you, because what you're doing is living your life vicariously through your child, because you're quite dull, aren't you, really? Dull LinkedIn person.
I know. Freedom not to be engaged with it.
Oh, God.
The chief's returned.
Oh, she's back.
She's back. Quick, behave.
Only because I thought you were going to go on for an hour now about the parenting Olympics, and I just think that's brilliant. I thought,
I like that, parenting Olympics.
It's
Brilliant.
It is.
But no, thank you, all of you. It's been really interesting, really good, and I think you've given people some hope as well, if anything else, of what is possible. But again, the big thing is only when we're in the right space, when we're in the right mindset. And that's what I always say for World Childless Week: you can only write, you can only submit when it's your time to do so. And I think that's really important.
I think it is. And I'm so sorry we didn't get to deal with all of the questions here. I think perhaps maybe we could just we might just pick these up perhaps maybe in our next episode. So
I'd like to say, carry on in an episode. I think people would be interested to hear more.
There's a kind of a focus we've got about the next episode we're recording next weekend. Next weekend. We are, yes, Michael.
Okay,
Sunday.
cool.
It's all right, we'll remind you. And it's going to be with MIST, who are miscarriage and infertility support, and they will be sharing things and resources that they do. And they do a lot of stuff around different areas of miscarriage and infertility. There's a bit of trying to conceive, I think, on their website. Just be aware of that if you go and look them up. But we'll be looking specifically at what they're doing around childlessness and looking to support and grow with them, because I think that's important. And they go into companies and they run these events for companies. So again, a really good resource that's got the potential, I think, to help lots of people in the workplace. So that will be coming out in October. That's our October episode. And currently the one that we've got is the sex and intimacy, which if you've been listening to that, then thank you so much for the love and kindness over that too, because we were very, 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 very nervous about that one.
It was good that you did that one as well, the World Childless Week, because it was a topic that people were scared to talk about, so it was important. So before again we do distract, I'm just going to say one last thing. If anybody does actually contact their HR department or a manager and get some real positive reactions, or even get policies put in place, get in touch with me and let me know, because I'm actually running, a few people are going to do this going forward. It's a blog to say who they contacted, how they contacted them, how it made them feel, what reactions they've got, and what's getting put in place. Because the more ways we can figure out the way that suits us to approach someone, that we've got that reference, it can help us build it up. But it's also saying a thank you to the companies that do acknowledge us, because again, that's a way to build bridges. So I want to put that on the website and say, you know, so if somebody says, oh, I'm not sure if I can do it in my company, go, well, have a look at the blogs, show your manager or your line manager, whatever it is, the blogs, and see what other companies have done. So it's not as if it's a case of I'm the only person in the world who wants to make changes. All these companies are already doing it and instigating positive actions to sort of include us. So that's what I just want to encourage people. And before we go on for another hour, I am going to end it there and say thank you so much to all three of you, Berenice, Michael and Sarah. It's been wonderful to see you chatting rather than to hear you chatting. And I hope you'll come forward and do it again for World Childless Week. There you go. I'm going to book you in for next year. There you go. I don't know what the topic is yet.
Cool.
You're going to get
Well, it's
booked
great.
in.
It was, thanks, Steph. That was
Thank
great.
you.
And look, if anyone wants to reach out to me and just throw me something, you know, what do you think about this? You want a sanity check, or not that I'm any good, but together we can make this happen. So
Definitely.
yeah, please hit me up. Facebook, Instagram, not too good on Twitter right now, but I'm working on it.
I will put links to individuals on the web.
We've actually put
links
something
on
in the chat as well. So in the chat you'll find our website, and we're all on there. I'm very good on Twitter. I'm a bit rubbish on Instagram. So we've all got our strengths and weaknesses, haven't we? Really. So there you go. You can find me on Twitter.
That's brilliant. So thanks once again, everybody,
Thank you.
and we'll see you all again soon.
Brilliant. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.